Hey everyone, One Spittin' here. So I wanted to provide a follow-up video to the one I did just a few days ago talking about the upcoming changes to the Ninth Age and the reasons behind them. Um, because there's been a fair amount of discussion on the forums and comments on my channel and specifically Bugman's created a thread on the Ninth Age forum just to talk about the video, and I really like that. I like that he did it. I like the tone that he used, where it's just let's just talk about this, and I thought it was great. A lot of times these comments are kind of not really hidden, but nobody really sees them because they're buried, as a comment on my video or something like that. And I thought, in fairness, I wanted to bring some of these concerns to light, to just talk about them openly. So to do that, I needed to be able to. Well, one way of saying it is to give them voice. So I'm giving them voice here. I'm going to give my response, but I'm not sure I have an answer for them per se. I'm certainly not saying that they are wrong, um, in every particular or anything like that. I'm just saying I'm going to give them shine some light on some of the concerns, and then just give my response to it. So I want to start off with one because I think my response to this one um, frames my responses to all of them. So this was posted on my video. It's by Thomas Mertens. He said, "I think these changes will make it harder for the target audience to make the jump to Ninth Age." My cat is doing me. That's great. Will make it harder for the target audience to jump from Ninth Age from Warhammer. Ninth Age never picked up here in Wisconsin, and the farther you get from Warhammer, the less likely I will be to get the old Warhammer players to play it. Up until now, I could freaking cats. I could tell them that if they knew how to play Warhammer, they could play Ninth Age with very little difficulty. You could take your old army list and convert it over with new points, very much as if it was a Ninth Edition Warhammer. Version 1.2, I'm not so sure that will be possible any longer. Are you freaking kidding me? Really? Um, so, got a couple of responses to that. First off, I think that old 8th edition players, if they haven't come over yet, they're not going to come over for that reason. Like, they might still come over because, hey, everybody's playing it now, or they just they really miss that type of game. I mean, there'll be small pockets of people playing 8th edition, just like there's still small pockets of people playing 3rd edition, but really, I mean, not very many. Um, and your other options are just to not play this kind of game, or to go or play Kings of War, or to play Age of Sigmar. Well, Age of Sigmar is even this kind of game, I don't think. But I think there are reasons why they may still come over. But the idea of, hey, it's just like that game that nobody's played in a year or two, I don't think they're going to come over for that. I think we're holding out the wrong hope, if that's why we're hoping to pull them in. Um, I don't think it was ever the case where you would pull your old army list. I don't. I haven't used any of my old army lists. I find myself working from scratch. And to be honest, is that what we were looking for anyway? I mean, if it were, let's say that it was a different world, and instead of killing the game, Games Workshop came out with a ninth edition. Is that what we would be hoping for them? That we could take our old army list and just tweak the points? I mean, it never was like that before. Every time there was an edition change, aspects of the game, some pretty big aspects of the game changed. As a matter of fact, in a lot of ways, um, even the changes you've seen with Ninth Age, I'm not sure are any bigger than the changes you saw between editions when Games Workshop had the game. I mean, call me on that. I may not be right on that, but changing from 7th to 8th was a big deal. A lot of players left the game when 8th edition came out. It totally changed. I mean, all of a sudden you had to start buying big hordes of units. So I mean, I think the changes, even now where I'm saying, there's big fundamental there's not big fundamental changes. It's still basically the same game that we've been playing with Ninth Age. There are some things that are changing that are big-ish, but no bigger than an edition change would have been. So I think all this kind of begs the question, if there was an option to stay the same with the way things have been in Ninth Age, especially if that was a carryover from Warhammer Fantasy 8th Edition, or to change it. And obviously, I mean, there's still a lot of carryover. I mean, it's still a rank and file game. I mean, it's still a command group of champion, standard bearer, musician. I mean, one because those are kind of iconic things in 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 historical battles, and they've made their way into Games Workshop, and they stuck around. I mean, there's still a lot of things that are the same, but most of the things that are same are same because the Games Workshop didn't create that idea. It's just they kind of pulled it in from history or whatever. But if given the chance to keep something the same or change it, um, one automatic tendency is for people, not everybody, but the people who are who seem most concerned. I think what they're saying is, if in doubt, change it. I mean, if there's not a huge reason I'm sorry, if in doubt, keep it the same. If there's not a huge reason to change it, keep it the same. And I'm not saying that the Ninth Age writers, creators are, saying in every instance change it, because it would just be too many changes. So a lot of this kind of begs the question: why change anything? I mean, if there's a big, huge, glaring problem, I think most people would agree, yes, you should make a change. If there's no glaring problem and everybody's happy with it, then we probably shouldn't make a change. And in between those two extremes, there's kind of a big gray area that is, you know, we could make a change, but some people think, it's not broken enough, why change it, et cetera, et cetera. So there are four primary reasons why changes are made to the game. Any changes at all. There are four reasons why. One is to improve the game. So again, big glaring problem. And sometimes it's even not a glaring, huge problem, but it's a consistent problem that is awkward to try to solve by making tiny tweaks. Sometimes you just need to take a step backward and go a slightly different direction and approach the problem that way, and it solves things. Army composition changes, in my opinion, are like that. The second reason to make changes is to align with the background. A lot of people have said this on the forum. I don't think the creators of Ninth Age originally said this, but there are a lot of people in the forums who said that the game should be background driven, not rules driven. Start with the background and then create a game that fits it. Now make sure it's a good game and make sure that it's as balanced as can be and stuff. And I think that idea took root, and I've certainly subscribed to it. I like that idea. Align the game with the background, and sometimes there are needs for that. So let me give you a for instance. When I look at the changes to the magic system, and in a large part the magic system's staying the same. What's different is, whereas before there were 8 colleges of magic in the Warhammer world, and then there were just 8 colleges of magic, meaning 8 magic lores, and then there were just a ton of other magic lores. There was 2 for the orcs and goblins, there was 2 with Skaven, there were 4 with warriors of chaos. I mean, there's all these different magic lores, and I think that strict setup wasn't something that anyone felt was essential. Like, yeah, that's the way Games Workshop did it. Okay, that's cool. To me, and I'm not saying this is a reason behind the change necessarily, because I'm saying this is my impression. One, it's not really that consistent. So Teclis was the greatest wizard of all time, and he knew so much. He knew there were 8 realms of magic. He knew crap. He knew 8 out of 20. I mean, that doesn't make sense to me. Like, if you're gonna have eight kind of, I don't want to say where there are 8 winds of magic, but these fundamental forces that were channeled into 8 winds of magic or whatever, then have that be it and have that drive everything. But it wasn't. It was that, and there was even more than that existed, that some little goblin shaman knew that Teclis had no idea about. I mean, not the end of the world, but it wasn't consistent, and to stick with that wasn't clean. It doesn't set right. When you're sitting down to write the background, you're having to do kind of these mental gymnastics to try to make that fit, and there's no reason to make it fit. Now, sit down and come up with a new system, and in which case they chose 10, and like I've said before, I think the background on it is really cool, and it's more consistent. Like, here are 10 elemental forces. They interact together in some ways that make sense, and that's it. I mean, that's the way the world works, and so therefore that's the magic that is possible. It's just a cleaner, more elegant system for Magic. So staying the same, as in aligning very closely with what Warhammer was, in this instance, I don't think was necessary or justifiable. So I said there are 4 reasons for change. So the one was to improve the game. Number 2 was to align with the background. Number 3, and this is important, and I don't talk about it a lot, but number 3 is to put the game in a position where we're not under the shadow of Games Workshop. Now, the Ninth Age from the very beginning has tried to be very, very careful about not infringing on their intellectual property for a number of reasons. One, it's not right. Two, it's we don't, nobody wants anybody to get sued or anything like that. So, if in doubt, the more we can move away from it, the better. And what that does for us, which is the 4th reason, is it makes it possible to allow companies to print and distribute Ninth Age materials and put it in game stores. Now that's huge. So I think the thinking is, well, my thinking is that Games Workshop hasn't sent us a cease and desist letter yet, because I think they would be hard pressed to find a specific something that they could tell us reasonably to quit doing. Right? We've tried really hard to stay away from their IP, but the game might change a little bit once the Ninth Age as an entity isn't in stores, but the things that we wrote are being put in stores by companies, and we want that to happen. We don't care if companies make money off of this work. What we care about is having a very good game that is successful, and by successful it means a lot of people play it. And I think we're going to bring in new players more if we have stuff being sold in stores. Now, game stores have a reason to support us. They have stuff they can sell. A lot of players want a hard copy book, even though they could get it for free. They'd rather pay a little bit of money and have a physical copy of it. And I'm one of those people. I would like that. So we just want to make sure that now we start printing stuff and people are selling it and making money, that we are a nice healthy distance away from the intellectual property of Games Workshop. So again, what I'm talking about is that gray area between things that obviously need to change and things that obviously need to stay the same. And we're saying in that area, when in doubt, when it could change, that's kind of the reasons that come up. Does it make the game better? Does it align better with our background? Does it put us in a position where we're further away from the IP of Games Workshop, so that we can come to a point where we have books printed and put them in stores and stuff like that. So just today, I read a long post where the person was complaining that the Ninth Age is abandoning Warhammer Fantasy's old world fluff. And I'm thinking, yeah, I'm a little bit surprised that anybody thinks that we shouldn't. So if you're thinking that we should keep the fluff of the old world as it is, it's a wrong sentiment. We cannot legally keep that fluff. I mean, that's Games Workshop's intellectual property. And if we're gonna, and it's you can always do the pseudo plagiarism, like, yeah, we didn't copy it word for word, but we pretty much write the same thing they said. We can do that with game mechanics all day long. Game mechanics, as far as I understand, you can't claim that as intellectual property, but everything else, yeah, you can. And we can't just change 2 letters in a person's name and keep that. Oh, it's Teclin, not Teclis. I mean, come on. We have a team of people writing background that I've bragged about before. I'm telling you, it's good stuff. It's good original stuff. The feel and flavor of the world is similar to the feel and flavor of the Warhammer world. It's just it's different. But the tone is right. The tone is good, and it's really enjoyable to read. I mean, you've seen it in the Undying Dynasties book, the Sylvan Elves book. I am so excited to read the full rule book with all the kind of the world's background, and that stuff is coming out pretty soon. I'm telling you, it's good stuff. So, of course, we are abandoning the old world. Games Workshop destroyed it. We had to move on as a community, and moving on means we have to create our own world with its own history and background and stuff. And I think that's okay. All right, so Ian Boyd posted on my channel. He said, the only thing I'm against is creating armies that have specific strengths and weaknesses, is that it goes against what you talk about in some of your videos, that you should not build an army that plays itself. Okay, well, you're misinterpreting what I mean. When I say you shouldn't build an army that plays itself, I mean you shouldn't play an army that doesn't engage in the game, that you don't have to make decisions. If I have an army that every model on the table shoots and it's really good shooting, and I just sit there and roll dice, I don't have to move. The only decision I have to make is what do I shoot at? And my opponent doesn't have too many decisions to make. He just has to try to get across the board. That's not engaging in the game. That's a list that plays itself. I think Death Star lists are often that way. I'm going to put all my points in this unit, and it's up to you to figure out how to get those points. And if you can't, then the worst that's going to happen is it's going to be a draw for me because haha. I hate those lists. That's what I'm talking about when I talk about building a list that plays itself. But to Ian's point, he sees that it seems that by creating armies that favor or go against certain strategies goes down that path. My response, we're trying to avoid seeing the same types of lists across all armies. I don't see how that automatically leads to point and shoot lists. But that has to be addressed separately, which is like through the new army comp system and stuff like that. I think it's a fair point, though. That's like if we say, well, we want Sylvan Elves to play an avoidance style list, and now if you're going to play Sylvan Elves, you have to play avoidance style. I think that would be wrong, and I don't think that's what's happening. What we're saying is we don't want the Sylvan Elves to play the kind of list where they are great in prolonged combats. They grind really well. That's not what Sylvan Elves are about. They're about mobility and yes, shooting and glass cannons. They hit really hard. They just can't stick around for a while. That's what we're talking about. So maybe what I'd really like to see in the future are different I want to see different categories evolve instead of just, what is it now? Death Star lists, avoidance lists, gunline lists. So we could probably name 4 or 5 types, and but there could be a lot more than that. And I'm hoping that the Sylvan Elves might develop 3 or 4 or 5 types of lists that they can field, and maybe other armies say, you know what, if we took this certain kind of playstyle that Sylvan Elves can do, and we modified it for our army, and we could do this, that kind of thing. I think can, and I'm hoping will happen. All right, Manel Perelada, I think, on my channel. He said, I think 9th is getting less unique. For example, I agree that the Abomination coming back to life on a 6+ could be game-changing, but in the end, this is a game and it was fun. Now the Abomination is such a boring monster to play, it has nothing special. Okay, well, the Abomination being boring now, I don't know if it is or not, I don't play it. That's a separate issue. Like, if it's boring, then we should find a way to make it not boring. I think the old Hell Pit Abomination was just too overpowered, very much like the old Steam Tank. And I think what you're seeing are those things are being toned down. They're being toned down. It does make the game less unique, such that everything's the same. What we're trying to do is make it less unique in the sense that, I don't think it's less unique, but in the sense that all units should be able to be dealt with except for really specific hard counters. That's all that's trying to do. And an A-bomb was such a powerful thing. Coming back on a 6-up, I hated that. I hate it. You're not getting any sympathy from me on that aspect going away. Thing was so hard to kill, and like, oh, I rolled a 6, it's back. Like, great, brilliant. So to your point, I think units should have flavor and character. We need to find a way to make them fun and unique and interesting to play. But yeah, not in a way that's just wonky. The Demons of Chaos old rule that if they rolled Snake Eyes after combat, all the wounds came back. I think I had 2 games where I think maneuvered well and had just this amazing combo charge, just crushed a unit. They all came back. I lost the game because the guy rolled Snake Eyes. I'm like, that's not fun for me. I don't think, oh, that's wonky. Yeah, screw your wonky. I don't like it. Not you, Manuel. All right. Another comment. This by Commander Kase, I think. It looks like Case. He says, thanks for the heads up, but honestly, for a community-based game, it sure looks a lot like a select few interpret the community, and on the basis of that, make up the rules. Yes, and I'm trying not to be sarcastic here. I think there's a discrepancy in how people are interpreting what it means to be a community-based or community-driven game. We don't vote on every rule. That would be awful. Matter of fact, my response to him in the comments was, writing rules with 5 people is difficult enough. Trying to do it with 8,000 would be absolutely impossible. And when I wrote that, I was talking about my Beast Herds experience, where there's 3 of us on the book making the rules. Then we had to interact with representatives from the rules team, and it was really hard to find consensus. You'd come up with a really creative, innovative idea, and somebody else would not like it, and sometimes I think they were right and not liking it, and sometimes not. It was just hard. Um, to create a game where you were trying to get consensus among everybody is not the best way to go, I don't think. And it's kind of like, I think the more you need consensus in something, I mean, all of us, I think, probably through volunteer or other activities, been involved in things that do function kind of like a true democracy. And a lot of times what you end up are a bunch of compromises and not necessarily the best solutions. Like sometimes I'd rather do this or do that, but don't do this thing in the middle. But we did the thing in the middle because that's the only thing everybody could agree on. And I mean, that would just be awful. And then when I said, you can't write rules with 8,000 people, he said, then perhaps stop saying it's community driven when in fact it's 5 people who decide how things turn out. Well, first of all, it's not 5 people. It was 5 people in the beginning, and now I don't even know what it is. We have the structure of it now is fundamentally different. We have these different teams of people. Each team of people will be responsible for, I think, 4 to 6 books. I forget. And there's oversight, and then there's people interact, and there's well over 100 people, I think, certainly well over 50 people that are involved in writing the rules and stuff. And if I'm wrong, I'm wrong. It's certainly more than 5. Um, but to say then stop saying it's community driven. Community driven doesn't mean that everyone writes the rules, or everyone votes, or whether to keep certain rules. It originally meant that the whole thing, originally when we were saying this is a community-driven game, that meant that we as a community were abandoned by Games Workshop. We came together and created a game, and by community we meant those 5 people. Because they/we, all of us are the community. That's what it originally started out. And then I think it kind of evolved to, it was community-driven, i.e., it wasn't a company-driven game. It was players making a rule by players for players. And then it's kind of evolved into we still want it to be community-driven. We do use polls quite a bit to try to get a feel for things, but that doesn't mean we're going to do it for every little thing. I mean, even some big things, because some things when you take 3 steps backward and then go a slightly different direction, like let's say with the magic paths, that's the kind of thing you can't poll in a way that's going to have any chance at all of people being open to something new. You know what I'm saying? Like, should we keep the magic paths the way they are now, or let's scratch and start over again? Well, I think if I were asked that, I'd say, well, I don't know. I'm happy with how they are now. We're not pandering to the community. Like, let's not make any changes the community doesn't want. We're saying let's make a good game, and when it seems reasonable and worthwhile, then let's poll the community. We can go a couple different directions. Let's see what people think. But sometimes it's like, no, this is going to be too hard to describe otherwise, and we think this is a good thing. Let's just come out with it. Nothing is set in stone. If we came out with something and said, oh wow, that was awful, we can always change things. I mean, I don't think we would go back to 8 core magic paths with 12 additional magic paths. I mean, that's just wonky. I don't think we're going to do that. All right, so Final Bad Guy said, and this one I have to admit, I'm going to get a little sarcastic here. And I said I'm trying to just give voice to things, and I think that a lot of people have good points. I'm just trying to give them some airtime. This one, I don't know if I agree, if I think it is. He says, so in essence, you played on the grief of Warhammer players to launch your own product, and now that you have your footing, you want a new audience. It makes good business sense. So he's using sarcasm, in case you didn't pick up on that. So I'll answer with sarcasm. Yes, we played on the grief to launch our own product, to benefit ourselves. It was great. By donating hundreds, thousands of hours without any compensation, without any chance of future compensation, we did it. We tricked the community. Yeah. Piss off. And that actually really makes me mad. We weren't playing on the grief of anything. We were abandoned by the game that we played. And so people got together and made a new game so that people who liked Warhammer Fantasy could still have a similar type of game to play. Now, over time, it's going to evolve, and I don't think we're tricking anybody in doing that. Yeah. launch your own product. Like, nobody's benefiting from this. The only benefit anybody's getting from this is we want a particular kind of game and we want a good game. And Games Workshop, for years, made it a bad enough game that we had to have Swedish comp and we had to have extra rules. Every tournament had to have, not every tournament, but a lot of tournaments had to have comp systems to try to fix what was kind of messed up in their game. So we're trying to make a better one, and you can't just slap band-aids on stuff. Anyway, yeah. So the original intent of this game was to provide old 8th edition players with a continuation of what they were used to, because all of us were reeling from the destruction of the Warhammer Fantasy world and game. But that belongs to Games Workshop. We can't duplicate it. I'm reading some notes I made to myself, so I think I've already covered a lot of this. We can't duplicate it. We don't really want to. The things they got right are the broadest brush strokes of this game. There was nothing so great about 8th edition. Most players seem to like 6th edition the best, so it seems to me. So I even tried to keep the idiosyncrasies that were in 8th, but weren't there in previous editions. So people express concern about attracting new players, and a long-term growth strategy aimed at old 8th edition players is seriously flawed. We've transitioned 8th edition players. If we want to attract new players in the future, we need to find a new source of new players. And most people who have given 9th Age a chance really like what's here. There's no point in arbitrarily staying close to what 8th edition did. If we're going to do that, let's pick 7th edition. Let's pick 6th edition and stay arbitrarily close to that. They were more popular editions, or at least 6th edition was. What we're doing is we're engaging in problem solving with the game because it still isn't and never can be perfect, but we can fix problems. The biggest problem is making sure the game has character and flavor, which I talk about in terms of being background driven. We're starting there. We're making changes as they seem appropriate. Another problem is that some abusive, i.e. not fun for your opponent, lists can still be built. I think that's always going to be a problem, because I think that's, people try to get as competitive a list as they can make, and sometimes in so doing they create lists that aren't fun to play against, and so I think we're always going to have to work against that. Another problem is that some parts of the game bog down. It's the designer's jobs to name the problems, address the problems, and that's what you see happening here. All right, so Evil 7 Ash said, "What's striking about this whole ordeal is that Army's core competence polls clearly suggested that a vast majority of the community expected armies to keep doing what they had been doing throughout 8th edition. With this in mind, the argument that 9th Age is a new and separate game of the rules team wishes to listen to the voice of the gaming community is hollow or even self-contradictory." Continuing on, "You can't pretend 9th Age rule set is driven by the will of the people and ignore what the polls suggested at the same time." And he says, parenthetically, "According to the polls, all the armies should essentially be the same thing they used to be in 8th. Well, I think you fundamentally misunderstand what the polls are saying. The polls, what people said in the polls was what they wanted the armies to keep doing the things they did in 8th by and large. Like they wanted Warriors of Dark Gods to play in a way that the Warriors of Chaos used to play. But the polls didn't address, did you want every specific thing the same? So when the Warriors had units that didn't align with the core way they play, people couldn't say yes or no to that. The polls weren't asking that. We went into the polls saying we want the armies to be consistent. If we're saying that the Sylvanelle should play a certain way, then we want them to play a certain way. So he said, "Please correct me if I'm wrong. I hope I'm missing something there." Well, I mean, in my opinion, that's what you're missing. I think you're right in the sense of, could it be self-contradictory? If there might be times when we want them to be a new separate game, and we also want to listen to the voice of the community. If the community said, we want you to play exactly the way 8th edition play, I think we would just say we can't. I mean, legally, it wouldn't be a wise thing to do. I'd say also most people don't want to lose a particular playing option they're used to, but the vast majority of the feedback has encouraged us to be background driven. So that's the self-contradictory part. If the community says, if they said we want to play every play style that we are used to playing and be background driven, I'm like, well, you can't do both. So at some point we have to choose. All right, so Matthew Whiteman said, I must admit I'm concerned this will make the already tough sell of recruiting people in ninth age virtually impossible. I'm going to wait and see, but I'm worried this is a huge misstep. It's hard to predict the future. I mean, there's a lot of that going on, and I'm doing a lot of that too. I'm like, this is going to be great. You're going to love it. This is going to make the game great. Well, I don't know that for sure. I think so. And then some people are saying, I don't think so. It's going to be hard to get new people. Um, I'll say this. I'm spoiled in my area. Ninth Age is more popular in the city that I live in than Warhammer Fantasy ever was. Even in the heyday of 8th several years ago, there are more players playing it now than there was then. We've attracted a lot of former Warhammer Fantasy players, players that didn't even play 8th. We've attracted a lot of current 40K players. I see a lot of younger players come in. They play 40K. They're getting tired of it. They're trying this. They like it. I think the ability to recruit new players is a challenge that needs to be addressed, but staying similar to 8th edition isn't going to solve that problem. I don't see how it does. All that does is get the players that were playing 8th and they want to keep playing 8th, and as time goes on, that group is smaller and smaller and smaller. HJ Fudge 123 says, but for me at least, I'm not so worried about whether or not elves play like orcs or whatnot. I mean, sure, that's important to me, but I feel it already exists for the most part. My worry is that these changes will make my Undying Dynasties play and look like every other Undying Dynasties army out there. I think that's an excellent point. So we want the armies to be unique, but in making the armies unique, we could go too far and make them so unique that there's really only one play style. Now, I'm not predicting that's going to happen, but I think that's a very legitimate, I don't fault that concern. I think that's a very logical, if we took this to an extreme, it could look like this. So we just need to make sure that doesn't happen. I want there to be different play styles for each army that evolve, like I said earlier. I think one of the things that the people who've played Kings of War and didn't like Kings of War, and I'm always defending them now, it seems like. A lot of people do like it, and I think that's great. But the people that played it and didn't like it, one reason was there's all the armies were the same. I mean, with literally maybe one little difference, one little stat separates an elf from a human, and they pretty much just play the same. When you do that, it makes it really easy to balance a game at the cost of flavor and uniqueness. So everybody who's saying that we're going too far towards Kings of War, I'm like, no. If anything, I think you could say we're taking one step in that direction, but they're 40 steps in that direction. So it's what I call a slippery slope fallacy, and that is taking one step in the direction of something doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to automatically go to that extreme. Not everything is a slippery slope in that way. Sometimes it's just, no, I mean, there are some things that would be better if it were a little bit in the direction, for example, that Kings of War went. But to H.J. Fudge's credit, I think that's a great point. I think we need to make sure it doesn't happen. I don't predict it's going to happen, but fair enough. Casual 1414 says, having converted to Kings of War for the past year, I now realize, this is, I think, a very interesting comment, by the way. That's my parenthetical. I now realize the difference between the games and what made 8th edition unique from any other game, and why I still believe it is the king of tabletop mass fantasy battle. Kings of War is a much different game. Kings of War is a chess match. You're only thinking about moves ahead with a good amount of certainty of battle outcomes. Pawns are pawns, rooks are rooks. How's your opponent going to counter a move, and what is your reaction? This is Kings of War. 8th edition had this element, but the game was more on how you reacted to things neither your opponent nor you can control. I think that's brilliant. I think that really nails something there that I do enjoy about the game. The irresistible force that sunk your mage or blew up an entire unit of yours or your opponent's. That simple charge that failed when you didn't roll the 3-up you needed. It was a very reactionary game. I'm going to pause for a second. I think that's such a great insight. And although I will say there are some of those extremes that I don't want in the game, I think that nails it. I think you want, I have a battle plan, but this is a game where sometimes wonky enough things happen that you have to be able to think on your feet, and I like that. Yes, I do agree that toning it down will keep me from having a heart attack, I think. But anyway, I think that's an excellent point. What I found with 9th is a step away from this, and I feel it was lost for the sake of the balance everyone thought that 8th needed. 8th out of the book was rough, but with the community's input and comp on a tournament level, tightened the rules and balance but kept the great randomness. From the beginning, I hoped 9th would make the subtle tweaks 8th needed to keep the game alive, but it's clear the focus is on creating some sort of successor without having its own identity. Now that I disagree with. I think we're absolutely creating our own identity. I think that's actually blatantly false. We're moving away from 8th a little bit, but if you played 8th edition and then you play, even with whatever changes we come out with from 9th, you would still recognize it's the same feel and flavor of a game. It'll always be the offspring of 8th. Why venture so far from its roots? It'll always be the offspring of 8th in the sense like I'm always going to be the son of my parents. Yeah, I mean, that's where we came from. He said, just a ramble, I miss 8th. I think those are very good points. The only thing I'll end with is the most important thing to note here is that you're playing Kings of War, but you wish you were playing 8th. Most 9th Age players that I know are playing 9th Age and extremely happy they're not playing 8th anymore. So, something to consider. All right. Ungrosch der Rot, I think, said, I'm just wondering how they're going to make every army unique in its playstyle when there are not many options to choose from, but like 16 different army books. Yeah, I don't have any great answers here. We're trying to make the armies unique. I'm hoping that players will find ways to be creative with each one rather than relying on rules writers to dictate playstyles. I know that we're making sure some playstyles are available and some playstyles are not available for each one. But, I'm also thinking of playstyles that haven't been explored yet. And in previous editions, there was Hero Hammer. That was a common style. And back in that day, there really was no Death Star or Avoidance style list. There were fundamentally different playstyles. So right now, we have a kind of this random set of names that we use to talk about playstyles, but they're not set in stone. The new ones can evolve, and I'm hoping they will. John Tailby says, I think you want to make sure that all armies have the option to become a combined arms army. You want some fast moving, some blocks, some shooting, some combat. Make armies one-dimensional makes for a very boring playstyle. I actually kind of like that idea. I mean, even though at the same time I'm agreeing that when you look at armies, we want them to have defined strengths and defined weaknesses. I also kind of like the idea that they all have the possibility of being combined arms, or you could say a balanced army. Why can't armies like Chaos Warriors have bows or crossbows? There used to be Marauders. Well, I'm not sure they can't have them. We just want to make sure that it's a weakness, that they're not great at it. And if you would say that we want every army to have the option to have units that are great at everything, that is a path we could take. And who knows, maybe in the future we will take that path. But I think right now what we're trying to explore is, let's make the armies more unique. And so that means there's some things they're not going to be good at. Most every army, I can't think of any army that doesn't have some fast troops, some blocks, shooting. I think for the most part it is there. And shooting is the one thing, I think most every army has it. Shooting is the one thing I think there might be some armies they don't have decent shooting. Beast Herds, Warriors of the Dark Gods. I think they're just not going to have good shooting. But at the same time, they make up for it with speed. Beast Herds, their ambushing rules, the picking up swift stride when charging flanks and rears. Warriors of the Dark Gods, one, they can be really fast, and two, they have such great armor that they're resilient to shooting. May not be the best long-term answer. I don't know, but at least there's an attempt saying if you're in the rare situations of not having one of these combined arms elements, then you make up for it in other ways. So on the 9th Age section, Bugman created a post, and he made a lot of very good comments. He said, I will admit I'm one of those who liken the changes to going towards Kings of War. As you rightly say, that's a bit unfair on Kings of War, blah, blah, blah. It's heavily streamlined, has little magic or magic items. Its unit entries have very little customization ability. I mean, look at Kings of War, and to say we're taking a step that direction, let's be fair to 9th Age, it's a tiny step in the direction of what they did. So you can understand the concern. 9th Age turns around and says it wants to streamline the game. It wants to reduce. Well, just don't read too much into it. Streamlining the game, again, it's kind of that slippery slope fallacy, what I'm calling that. It doesn't, one step in that direction doesn't mean 100 steps in that direction. Anyway, streamlining of units. In most ways, I fully agree here. The option should be modeled on the unit, but some stuff isn't modelable. Not sure what that means. It shouldn't be an option. I agree too. I don't think the option, the ability to model something is the only criteria. I think really what we're trying to do is we still want options available, just not so many options that it makes it really difficult to know when you see a model on the table to really know what it's doing. Yeah, I just don't want to go over. I think the intent is let's just not go overboard with it. So I'm not saying you're wrong here. I think there should be options available regardless of whether or not you could model it. Um, I'm okay with that. I think everybody's okay with that. It's just, and I said in all my videos, right now the problem is there are so many options available that I, for instance, can see a unit of peg knights and they could be very, very different things. And a list could field 3 peg knight units with 3 different combinations of upgrades, and it would be a nightmare. Change in army building. So list building, like many here, has to be one of the best parts of the game, and I understand what the poll said. However, I'm someone who fully believes that you should be able to take nearly any type of army playlist you like. For example, if I want to run an ogre gun line, I should be able to, or if I wanted a monster mash, that shouldn't be a problem. What I expected, probably like most people, is that when the polls said an ogre gun line should be a weakness, is that it would still be possible to build such a thing, but it would be expensive point-wise, or it would lack suitable synergy internally compared to, say, an ogre horde, and wouldn't play well, but it should be possible. I don't disagree with that. I kind of like that. I don't know. I don't know honestly whether or not that's going to be true or not, because I mean you're implying that that won't be possible. I think you're probably right, because I think, if we say ogre shooting is limited to 25%, I don't know what it is, but let's say it's 25%, then yeah, it's 25%. So it's hard to field a gun line with only 25% shooting. But the comp system, putting in that 25% cap, if they have that, that's an easy way to change it. So if in the future people, if we said, ogres are kind of one-dimensional, can we make them have more shooting? That boom, it's such an easy, the structure in place makes that an easy change to make. Now, whether it's better for every army to be able to field every type of list or not, I think that's just a preference. So you would like to, I like having flexibility, but I don't necessarily want every army to be able to play gunline list. So we just disagree on what we would kind of like to see there. It goes on, I'm all for tweaks towards changing the way list building occurs, but I think actually trying to instill which army plays through more than points and rules adjustments and maybe something which isn't really needed. It's almost like Ninth Age is trying to do things for the sake of it rather than doing something for the better. Well, that's just not true. It's exactly the opposite. We're making changes in hopes of making the game better. Now, if we just disagree on the ramifications of what's done, so we think this will make the rules designers think this will make the game better, and you look at the same thing and say, no, I think it's going to make it worse. Yeah, I think that's just disagreeing on how it's going to play out, and we just need to see how it plays out. Magic, thank you for your notes on this. It's great to see someone actually talking about them, and I can see your point with regards to 1.1 was 8th edition balanced out. But I disagree that the current lores have a lot of redundancy. If that's really the case, the lores could have been tweaked to make them truly favorable, etc., etc. So I would say, yeah. I mean, one way we could have done it is keeping all 20 paths and just tweaking all of them. The fact is, there isn't just one best way to do something. So we like the idea of moving away from 8 core lores and 12 different ones, into what currently is 10 lores, and that's it, because it makes sense. Like this is the way things work. It kind of works with 8 core lores, but not really, because there's actually more lores out there than those 8 core ones. Whatever. Yeah, we could have done that, and we chose not to. And when there's an option to move away from Games Workshop and make the game better at the same time, then that's something that we do. And so I agree with the creators in that having the system of magic lores, whatever the number is, I don't care if it's 8, 10, or 12 or whatever, having that system and then just limiting who has access to what, it's a more consistent system than, again, Teclis knew 8, but he actually didn't know very much. I'm also curious, in 9th Age were able to poll the community on what it thought armies should look like play-wise, but didn't bother to poll them about major changes to core design like Magic. It just doesn't seem to sit well. Yeah, we don't poll about every decision. I talked about this already. There's some things like that it would be hard to create a poll to get at what we were talking about. I mean, we'd have to do all the work of creating the new system and say, look, read the background, read this. this is how it's going to play out with the armies. Now what do you think? But that's a lot of work to go to when you might just scrap it. So, and the last one. My biggest worry here is that you're suddenly going to see even more abusive lists when they have been curbed. You will be left with a horrible cookie cutter internet list because the choice will be more limited than you think. Because you're making more categories to choose from, and as we know, people always max out the best bits of every army. By restricting where you can choose this and by making a lot of those choices popular, you step away from the large army amount of close combat lists you see out there today. I disagree. That's a doomsday prophecy, and I don't agree. Everything in this game you've seen so far, and all in this specifically, it's like I'm worried this is going to happen. Like, why would you be worried about that happening? We've moved away from that already. And so why do you think we're going to go back? Every decision made is to move away from abusive lists. What we're trying to do is make it to where there's a greater variety of lists possible. That's the focus on balance, in large part, is trying to get it to where more units are playable, so therefore we should see a greater variety of lists. What we can't control is that somebody comes up with a good list to put on the internet and then everybody plays it. Like, we can't help that. Like, that's if that's what you want to do, then do it. But then there's always people that continue to look at the book and they come up with something different. It might take them, let's say it's 6 months later, somebody comes out with a new list, and now that's the internet craze. Well, that list was always available. It's just a lot of people just stuck with what they saw on the internet as being a very good list. So anyway, that was a lot longer than I thought it was going to be, and I need to go to work. So anyway, that's where we are with some of the comments, discussions going on, and just my response to them. For the most part, people seem to be excited as I am with some of the changes. So I'm not trying to focus on the negative. I'm just trying to give voice to people that are expressing some concern, and then just provide my thoughts about it. Anyway, that's it. Hope you enjoyed it.